D&D number 13, For Unto Us, in Jesus' name, chapter 16. It is December 14th at 8:30 a.m., Saturday morning. The Village Garden Apartments, Huntington Beach, California. They all pulled up at the same time. JoJo drove his truck, and Logan rode with him. The truck was loaded with mats from the local Kino studio. Pulling up next to him was Mark, then Ricky and Taylor, and then young Eric and Jordan. Melody drove in a few minutes later. They all wore their uniforms. The men immediately began unloading mats while the girls walked around the grassy area, making sure there was no toys or trash or rocks. Immediately, the Garcias came out of their apartment with Caleb, who was really the one who'd wanted the demonstration so badly. Ricky shook hands with Leonard Garcia and then smiled at Caleb. "Why don't you go help the guys get the mats out of the truck and laid out there across the grass?" "Okay," Caleb said and trotted off. One by one, more kids came out of their apartments and gathered around. There were 4 small rectangular buildings. Each held 12 total apartment units, 6 units on one side and 6 on the far sides. Ricky smiled at the Garcias. "Well, make yourselves comfortable. You are welcome to participate or just watch. I have to get to work." Taylor smiled as some of the teens came to speak with her. She decided to come because a few of the teen boys had asked her to come and show what she got. She had a feeling they were about to be surprised. Once the mats were set, covering most of the green area, Ricky told his crew to go around shaking hands and inviting anyone who wanted to participate to sit around the edge of the mats. He kept looking for Amari and Brittany, but they hadn't showed yet. Some adults began coming out to see the event, bringing lawn chairs and stools and even 5-gallon paint buckets to sit on so they could watch. Finally, they were pretty much set for the demo. Logan had a speaker with some music ready for the choreographed part. Young Eric had boxes of boards sitting nearby, as well as nunchucks, bow staffs, and blunted broadswords, which were all laid out near the mats. They all wore their gold uniforms just for added flair. Each uniform had a Kino martial arts embroidered insignia on the left breast. Melody and Jordan each wore white belts with a yellow stripe. Taylor wore her black belt. JoJo wore a black belt with 2 gold stripes, widthwise at the end of the belt. Logan had 3 gold stripes. Young Eric had 4. Ricky had 10 gold stripes and 8 red stripes, and they all removed their shoes to stand on the edge of the mats. Ricky started to speak with the Garcias about Amari and Brittany, but stopped when their door opened and the 2 kids walked out. Ricky went to greet them and found his blood pressure rising. He knelt down to the children. Taylor moved forward too. "Hello, Amari," Ricky greeted. "Hi," he said shyly. "Good morning, Brittany," Ricky said. She smiled brightly. "Good morning." He looked her over closely. She seemed fine. His eyes went back to Amari. "Amari, what happened to your cheek?" The boy's hand went up instinctively to cover the large reddened welt under his left eye. His eyes opened wide. "Oh, that ain't nothing." "How did it happen?" Ricky asked softly. The boy swallowed but didn't say anything. "Amari, you can tell me anything. Remember the principal at your school told you that you can talk to me." "Yes." "So tell me, son, what happened to your face?" Amari rubbed his cheek and looked around to see if anyone was listening. Ricky looked around too. Logan had turned on music and they were doing some stretches and warm-ups, and it looked like everyone was watching them. He turned back to Amari. "You're not in trouble, Amari. I just need to know how that happened." "Mr. T-Bone hit him," Brittany suddenly said. Ricky smiled at her. "Who was Mr. T-Bone?" "Mama's friend." Amari frowned. "He ain't no friend. He's her boss." Ricky drew a deep breath. "Why did he hit you?" "'Cause Mari asked Mom to stay with us," Brittany supplied. "Is that right, Amari?" Ricky asked. He nodded. "Whenever she goes out with him, she don't come home for days, and I told her to not go, and T-Bone told me to shut up, and I told him he ain't my daddy, and he hit me." "Yeah, and I thought Mr. T-Bone killed Mari, 'cause he wouldn't wake up, and then Mama and him left, and Amari waked up, and I cried." Taylor gave a little whimper and held her arms out, and Brittany immediately went to her and allowed Taylor to hold and comfort her. "Is your mother home now?" "Yeah," Amari answered. "They came home a little while ago." "They? Did Mr. T-Bone come back with her?" Amari nodded. "Does he do that a lot?" "No, just sometimes." "How do you feel about that?" "I don't like it. He spanked Brittany once, and he hits me all the time, and I wish he would go away." "Why did he spank Brittany?" "'Cause she was crying." "I see." And why does he hit you? Amari rubbed his hand over his cheek. He don't like me to talk. He always tells me to keep my mouth shut. Ricky rose. Well, I'm going to go talk to them for a minute. Amari's eyes opened wide in terror. Please, Mr. Kino, please don't. She's going to be real mad at me, please. And she's sleeping. And when she's sleeping, can't nobody wake her up. Ricky nodded and drew a calming breath. He would do the demo, he would talk to Mark, and then do what he had to do to protect these children. And they were going to live in this dangerous situation one more day if he could help it. He smiled at Amari. Okay, I won't right now. Come on, kiddo, you guys have a seat on the edge of the mat. He got the kids situated, then stood back and spoke to the crowd that had gathered. Good morning, everyone. We'll start in about 5 minutes. He immediately went over to talk to Mark, quickly explained the situation, and asked Mark to make a few phone calls to get the ball rolling. Mark stepped aside to get on the phone to one of their family attorneys at the firm. Ricky looked up to see some kids from down the street walking down toward them, and he smiled and welcomed them. He then went back to his group. They stood in a circle, each with a hand on the person's shoulder beside them. They bowed their heads and had a prayer. Finally, Ricky headed over to stand next to the speaker and took the microphone that Logan handed him. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ricky Kino, and we're happy to be here to show you a little of what we do at Kino Martial Arts. Let me introduce you to our group here. These two young ladies you see in the white belts with the yellow stripe are just beginning. This is Melody, he said as she bowed, and this is Jordan. She also bowed. Next we have my daughter Taylor. She's a black belt, as you can see. Taylor bowed. Next to Taylor is my nephew, JoJo Adams. You might have heard of him because he's been the USC quarterback for the past 3 years. JoJo is a second-degree black belt. Next to him is his brother, and so, of course, that also makes him my nephew, Logan Adams. Logan is a third-degree black belt. And next to Logan is my son, Eric Kino III, who is a fourth-degree black belt and is also the current Kino Challenge champion. Beside me is Master Mark Adams. He's my brother, my stepbrother to be exact, and the father of JoJo and Logan. Master Adams is a 7th-degree black belt and a Kino Challenge champion. Mark said something and held out his hand, and Ricky handed him the mic. Mark gestured toward Ricky. And just in case you didn't know, Ricky here is a Grandmaster. He is a 10th-degree black belt in 2 forms of martial arts, an 8th degree in 2 others, and he has several other belts that we won't go into. He's a Wing Chun master. He was the original Kino Challenge champion, and he won that challenge for 8 years running. Okay, here's your mic back, Grandmaster Kino. Ricky took the microphone. Thank you, Master Adams. As you can see, we believe in being very respectful to each other and to our students, and our students are very respectful to us. Okay, so that you can see what this group can do, we have a little demonstration of their skills, a little performance, so to speak, which we have put to music. We'll perform that first, and then we'll give a lesson for anyone who wants to participate. Ricky handed off the mic and stood in the exact center of the mat and bowed deeply. The music began, and it was the opening notes of Eye of the Tiger. Ricky's moves were choreographed perfectly to the music. Of course, he'd done this demonstration hundreds of times over the years. The music changed, and as he was attacked by young Eric and Logan, the girls and JoJo jumped in to help Ricky fight to the song Everybody Was Kung Fu Fighting. The demo went on as the music changed over and over to each feat. Ricky, Mark, and young Eric held boards high in the air, and JoJo, Taylor, and Logan smashed them with their amazing high kicks. Then Jordan and Melody held boards low, while JoJo, Taylor, and Logan bashed them with knife hands and elbows. Ricky and young Eric gave a super impressive demonstration of their nunchuck skills. Mark and Logan gave a demonstration of working with bow staffs. And then Ricky, Mark, young Eric, and Logan had the crowd gasping in amazement as they performed with the broadswords. When the demonstration ended, the audience applauded, yelled, whistled, and hooted for a long time. Ricky drank some water and went to the middle of the mat. Okay, now, who would like to join us on the mat and have a little lesson? Kino Martial Arts 101. Almost 30 kids and teens rose and came to the mats, and Mark quickly had them form 6 lines of 5 kids each, youngest to oldest. Ricky spoke next. Hold on. There. Ricky spoke next. Taylor, Jordan, and Mel, you help the first 2 lines. Logan, you help the next line. Young Eric, you help the next line. Mark, you get the 5th line, and I'll get the last line. JoJo, you stand there and look pretty. Everyone laughed, especially when JoJo did the Heisman pose. Ricky instructed. He taught them to bow. He taught them he taught them the high block. Ugh. Hold on. Too many words in that sentence. He taught them to bow. He taught them the high block, low block, double strike, back stance, and some kicks. He would teach one movement and then help the teens in his back line, then start on the next. The kids really concentrated hard and tried hard, and Ricky was pleased with their effort. Of course, when you put on a demonstration like they just did, it wins over the respect real quick. Once they demonstrated how a class might be, young Eric and Logan were asked to spar. Mark refereed, and Ricky explained that was what was happening. It was obvious that the spectators were totally engrossed and totally impressed, and they applauded long and hard for the two fighters. An hour after they'd begun, the lesson came to an end, and Ricky had the whole class line up. They bowed to their class instructors and then to Ricky. About that time, though it was a little later than expected, Bree drove up. Taylor, Melody, Jordan, and young Eric and Logan immediately went to help her unload the goodies that she'd brought. Ricky, along with Mark and JoJo, addressed their audience. If after this any of you are interested in pursuing this, let me know. I'll work with you on a personal basis to help you get the instruction you desire. Why? One of the adult men asked from where he leaned against the building. Why? Ricky asked. Why are you deciding to do all of this? I mean, like, what makes our little corner of the world so special, you know? Ricky smiled. Well, you'd have to ask God that second question, but I'll tell you the answer to the first question. We were working on the church next door. My wife and I saw these two little ones miss the bus, he said, gesturing to Amari and Brittany. My wife and I took them to school, so they got my attention. They introduced us to the other kids, and another young man asked for a demonstration when he found out who we were. But why would we agree to do that? Because every single day our family asks God to place in front of us those he wishes us to serve. And we serve God first, always. Why he thinks your little corner of the world is so special? You'll have to ask him. I don't need him to tell me the answer to that question. I trust him. I may not see his reasons right away, but many times I do see eventually. And watching Jesus make a way, it's the best thing in the world. He smiled at everyone. We've really enjoyed coming to meet you all today. My wife has brought some coffee and juices and milk and donuts because we never do a demo without providing some goodies. So we'll get out shoes and we'll get our shoes on. And if some of you young guys would help us fold the mats and load them into the truck, that would be great. And please don't walk on the mats with your shoes on. Thank you. Before that, JoJo, will you give a quick blessing on the food? JoJo bowed his head and gave a short, sweet blessing on the food and on the people in the crowd. And the mats were folded and loaded, and everyone moved toward the table that Bree brought with the canisters of fresh hot coffee and cups for the milk and juices and dozens of boxes of different kinds of donuts. Taylor made sure that she had Amari and Brittany with her and helped them get their beverage and little plates filled with goodies. Ricky stood and watched. Leonard Garcia came to him and offered his hand. Thank you, Mr. Kino. This was so much fun, and Caleb is in heaven. Oh, it's our pleasure, really, and please call me Ricky. He glanced around. Bree had the back hatch open on the SUV, and both Amari and Brittany sitting on the edge, their feet dangling. His eyes moved to Taylor, who was chatting with and entertaining a group of about 8 teens, 6 of them boys, 2 girls. He caught young Eric's eye and pointed to his own eyes and then to Taylor, meaning for young Eric to protect his sister if necessary, and young Eric nodded. Leonard, do you know this Mr. T-Bone the kids told me about? Leonard nodded. Well, not personally. He comes to stay with Tish every once in a while. He orders the kids around or sends them out of the house while he and Tish do their thing. I think he's her pimp. He also always has a supply, and I think he has some of these kids pushing for him. Well, that is coming to an end today, Ricky said softly. He's also armed. Ricky nodded. So am I. Leonard looked down at Ricky's waist. Ricky smiled. I'm talking about the word of God. Don't worry about me. I'm good. I'm not so worried about you as much as these people here. Ricky nodded. Understood. He looked down as his phone went off, and he nodded at Leonard. Sorry, I got to take this. He walked away. What you got, Joey? You and Bree are still officially foster parents, right? Yes. Okay, then. We're going to start working on having the 2 kids removed from the home. Well, how long will it take? Because I don't want them here even one more day. I think they're in danger. Well, we might be able to get it done today. The cops are going to have to come out and assess and decide why the kids are in danger, and I'm not sure if a swollen cheek is going to be enough. Well, oops. Let's see, let me start that over. The cops are going to have to come out and assess and decide why the kids are in danger, and I'm not sure if a swollen cheek is going to be enough. Well, it should be enough. What the hell? Maury! A man's voice boomed. Ricky looked up as a large man, bare-chested, in baggy pants and a cigarette dangling from his mouth, stood in the doorway of Amari's apartment. Amari jumped from Bree's vehicle and came running before she could stop him. He approached the man Ricky assumed was T-Bone. Ricky told Joey to send the cops and a few Ameritech if there were any nearby and went to join Amari. What's going on out here? Why you out here? Where's your sister? She's having donuts, Amari answered as he pointed to where Brittany sat on the car. Well, you go get her and come on, you coming with me. I ain't going nowhere with you. You think you can talk to me like that, boy? He raised his hand and Amari backed up, and T-Bone looked up to see Ricky approach. Ricky put a hand on Amari's shoulder. It's okay, Amari. Go back to Brittany right now and stay there. Amari looked up with his big brown eyes full of fear, but also full of hope. Ricky nodded. Go on. The Garcias were quickly trying to get the people milling around eating donuts and chatting to leave the area or at least take cover. I don't know who you think you're talking to, but he ain't your kid, and he better damn well do what I say, or I'll show him you won't show him anything. He's not your kid either, and he's not going anywhere with you. Why do you want him to go with you? Where's his mom? T-Bone's eyes narrowed. That ain't none of your business. Mark came down to stand beside Ricky, while the others were moving to protect the group of children. She's inside, right? Ricky pressed. Ricky stepped forward because he immediately knew something was very wrong. The man blocked him. He put his hands behind him and came out with a gun drawn from the back of his pants. People standing around all ducked and or ran immediately. T-Bone pointed the gun at Ricky's forehead. T-Bone pointed the gun at Ricky's forehead. Ricky put his hands up, but stepped forward instead of backward and moved so blindingly fast it was hard to tell what happened. Gosh. It ended with Ricky releasing the mag, checking the chamber, and handing the gun to young Eric, who'd come to help. You want to punch somebody? You punch me, Ricky taunted. Well, I mean, try to punch me. Come on, big guy. It's easy to hit little kids. Come try me. The man's face announced his intentions to charge, and Ricky merely sidestepped and kicked him in the back of the head as he passed. Ricky turned. Oh, come on. Try again. T-Bone looked around at everyone watching. He was furious. I'm going to kill you, you little white boy. You messed with the wrong person. Ricky chuckled. I was just about to say those same words to you. Ricky stepped forward. Come on, he yelled at the man. Come on, do something. The man charged, and Ricky took him out with one punch. The large man fell down, out cold. At the same moment, the cops pulled up, lights flashing. They ran from their cars, guns drawn. Ricky threw his hands up, but they went straight for the guy on the ground. Ricky spoke to one of the cops. You probably need to go check on the woman inside that apartment. She might need help. He was trying to take her kids and leave with them. The officer nodded, motioned at his partner, and they headed in. Ricky heard yelling and a call for someone to bring him Narcan. Ricky shook his head. He went up to speak with his wife. Hey, hon, he motioned at her. She smiled at her husband, glancing at the children. Taylor, y'all stay with Amari and Brittany while I speak with your dad. We got this, Mom, both Taylor and young Eric said. That was a very nice demonstration, Bree said. Ricky only nodded. I think their mom has overdosed. Not sure how bad it is yet. Bree grimaced. Well, what's going to happen to the children? I'm not sure. I'm hoping, if you're with me on this, to be able to foster them. Right now, we need to see if their mom is going to be taken to a hospital, or to rehab, or to jail, or a morgue. Right now, I think those are pretty much the only options. Bree sighed. Ricky looked at her pale face. Are you okay? I think so. I'm sorry I was late. I wasn't feeling so well this morning. Bree, babe, I think you need to see a doctor. She didn't argue. She simply nodded, and that bothered him. I have an appointment on Monday morning. He frowned. Well, that kind of worries me. Why? Because you feel bad enough that you've already made a doctor's appointment? What time is the appointment? It's at 9:45. Why? Because I'm going with you. Ricky, I'm okay. You don't have to tag along. My wife, who means life to me, is not feeling well, and I'm going to take her to the doctor on Monday. Period. We're in this life together, correct? She smiled. Yes, of course. I'm just saying it's probably not a big deal and not important enough for you to spend your morning with me. What in the world are you saying to me? You are important, Bree. And if this little illness is not a big deal, then fine, we'll go out to brunch. Don't you have a few promotion appearances this next week for the movie? I do, Tuesday and Thursday. She nodded. Okay. Well, then I guess we have a doctor date. He smiled as the ambulance approached. I better go see what's going down. Don't let the kids come near the apartment. Ricky joined the Garcias where they stood outside the apartment. They were being questioned about all they knew about the Meeks. Other police were getting statements from witnesses. Then an officer approached Ricky. Mr. Kino, may I speak with you, please? Ricky nodded and walked away. He was asked about and explained his involvement with the children. He told them he'd already decided that he was going to look into having the children removed from their mother's custody and getting her into rehab. When asked why he was so concerned with this little family, he'd had to explain. He sighed. Again, God showed me this family. The kids were in need of parenting. The mother was in need of help. What was I supposed to do, turn a blind eye? Well, many people do, the officer said. Well, I'm not going to condemn others or defend them. We all know that situations like this exist. I could spend all of my time and resources throwing money at the problem, but that's not how we operate. We serve God. He shows us who we need to focus on, and when He does, then we take action. God has focused our attention on this little street, the church, and the people who live on this same street. So right now, that's where we will focus. The officer nodded. So, if you don't mind me asking, what are your intentions for the people who live on this street? We intend to help anyone who needs help getting on their feet where they can support themselves. Not through handouts. We don't do handouts. But we might help someone to go to school or learn a trade or get their car fixed or get medical care. We intend on cleaning up the area so that they'll feel pride in their surroundings. We intend on turning the motel on the corner into a youth ministry where the kids can go to occupy their time, fellowship, and learn about Jesus. After this morning, my brother and I were tossing around the idea of providing a bus to take any kids who want to learn over to the Huntington Martial Arts Facility twice a week. There's so much that can be done, and it may take a while, but once we start a project, we won't stop until we succeed. Ricky smiled. And of course, if the friendly law enforcement would like to get involved in this project, we would be happy to have you work with us. The officer nodded. Let me give you my personal number. If you think you have something that we can help with, please give me a call. He took out a card, wrote his personal number on it, and handed it to Ricky with a smile. You know, I heard you Kinos were the real deal, but I usually don't put too much stock in what I hear from the media. I'm thinking you really are good guys. Well, thanks. Like I said, we serve God. We don't do it for fame or publicity. We've been blessed, and to those who have been given much, much is expected. That's Luke 12:48 in the Bible. We live by that. It seems you really do. I mean, I know you were at your kids' movie premiere last night, and here you are first thing this morning teaching martial arts to a bunch of kids. He shrugged. Well, they asked for a demo. We gave them one. No biggie. The officer nodded. That's such a good example. Mr. Kino, meeting you today has been a pleasure. He offered his hand, and Ricky shook it. So, do you know how bad she is? I mean, Tisha Meeks, Ricky asked. I don't know, but let me see if I can find out. The officer went inside the apartment. He wasn't in long and came back to Ricky's side. He shook his head. Well, she's alive. They're going to transport to the community hospital soon. Ricky nodded. What about her kids? Does anybody know if there are any relatives? The officer asked. Ricky shook his head. I already asked the neighbors, the Garcias, because they usually watch out for the children who, in my opinion, are neglected. The Garcias say they've never seen any relatives, no grandma, no aunts or uncles. So, officer, like I said, I was already looking into having the kids removed from the home. And my wife and I are registered foster parents, and we'd like to step in and take care of them until Ms. Meeks gets better. You know, she'll go from the hospital and possibly to jail. What would the charges be? Ricky asked. It was Mark standing nearby who answered. Well, besides the drug charges, there would be child endangerment, child neglect, child abuse, domestic violence. Ricky nodded. So, officer, how do I go about being allowed to take the kids home with me? We've already got a call into CPS, and they'll be arriving soon. Good. Mark, do you have some time to spare? Absolutely, Grandmaster Kino, Mark said. New scene. An hour later, only Bree, Ricky, and Taylor were still at the apartments. Logan and Melody, and JoJo, and young Eric and Jordan headed up to the church to meet Bristol, who'd informed them, or rather warned them, that Banny and Deuce said they were also coming to help. There were AMT agents on the premises, including the one assigned to Bristol, so they didn't feel like they were in any danger. They only had to make sure they didn't accidentally let on that they knew what Logan had nicknamed the Bang Gang was plotting. They kept a close eye on them, making sure their sudden interest in helping wasn't to actually sabotage. Melody's family also came to help, and also the Davis boys, Daniel and Jeremy, and their mom, Mickey, with Scarlett in tow. Jeff had to work. Mark Adams, too, had gone up to the church after leaving M's booster seat with the Kinos, in hopes that they would have to use it. There wasn't much more to do at the church that needed to be done before Sunday's meeting. There was a lot to do later, in the spring, when real renovations would begin, like the roof and the HVAC system and the bathrooms enlarged and made accessible. Today, there was only some last-minute cleaning, adding a few Christmas decorations, checking out the sound system and the monitors and the new control booth. Fresh flowers would be delivered late this afternoon. Mostly they would work on finishing touches on Ronnie's new office, laying down the carpet, moving in the desk and the large leather chair, moving his books from the old office into the new bookcases, setting up his new laptop, and hanging pictures. Down in the parking lot of the apartments, Taylor sat in her mom's car with Amari and Brittany watching Gabe's live stream of the Gabe Tanner Community Center Christmas pageant. As they watched, Taylor realized that Amari and Brittany didn't know anything about the birth of Jesus. They asked questions, and she began to tell them the real, true meaning of Christmas. What totally blew her away was that they were listening. They were totally intrigued. Their big brown eyes blinked at her as though they couldn't get the information into their heads fast enough. But if God lives in heaven, why did he want to send his baby down to live in this world? Why didn't he keep him in heaven? Wow, Amari, that's a great question, Taylor said. You see, God has a lot of children. You are also God's children. I am? Brittany asked. Yes. Your earthly mom and dad created your body. See, but God created your spirit, and your spirit entered your body and grew inside your mommy, and then you were born. But you're still God's child. But Jesus is a little different. He had an earthly mother, but God himself was the dad. God and Jesus had a plan. You see, the people on the earth, God's children who are the people on the earth, in this world, they keep doing bad things. And if you do bad things, and when you die, you don't get to go home to God and be with all the people you love and who love you. So God and Jesus decided to let his son come to the world with a regular mother. Okay, I don't know if this works. I got a phone call in the middle of that. We'll see if it looks like it's still recording. Okay, let me see where we stopped. Let's see. And if you do bad things, and when you die, you don't get to go home to God and be with all the people you love and who love you. So God and Jesus decided to let his son come to the world with a regular mother, a human mother. She stopped and sighed. She didn't know exactly how to explain it to the children without talking about how babies are made. She smiled. Anyway, so Jesus grew inside Mary's tummy, and when he was born, the angels appeared in the sky, and they sang because they were so happy that God's son came into the world. They named him Jesus, and he would teach the world all about God and about changing your life to live in a good way, and he taught them that love was the most important thing, to love God and to love your family and to love everyone. But he also told them to stop sinning. What's sinning? Amari asked. Well, it's doing bad things like lying or stealing. Jesus wants us to be happy, and he knows that the happiest thing is to be with God, the Father in heaven, and we can't be there with him. But Jesus said if we will stop sinning and change our attitudes, then he will take the punishment for us, and we can live with God. She frowned. She didn't think she was doing a very good job of explaining, but maybe it was at least a good start. She sighed. So Christmas is a happy time because it's like a giant birthday party for Jesus, the Son of God. It ain't a happy time for me, Amari said. Taylor leaned her head over and rubbed against his head. I know. And that's sad. There's a lot of sadness in this world. But Jesus wants us each to do everything we can to teach about him and help everyone to be happy. So we're going to help you and Brittany. Is my mommy dead? Brittany asked. No, sweetie, but she's real sick. They took her to the hospital to help her get better. Amari frowned. His mother wasn't sick, he thought. She took too many pills. He knew that. He looked up at Taylor. She ain't sick. She took pills. Taylor nodded. Well, she's sick inside her head, and that makes her think that she needs to take the pills. She has to heal inside her head first, and then she'll stop taking the pills, and then she'll be happy. The kids were silent. Taylor pointed to her phone as the children at the center sang a Christmas song. They listened in silence. Amari broke that silence when he asked, "What's going to happen to us?" Taylor sighed. I think that's what they're talking about. She pointed to her parents and the police officers and the lady with the notebook. Do you have any relatives? I mean, like a cousin or a grandma? We used to have a grandma, but she died when I was little. I don't know if we got a cousin. Well, well, that lady out there will find a place for you to stay. Amari turned his head and looked silently out the window. He tried to stop the tears that formed in his eyes, but when he tried to blink them away, instead they flowed down his cheeks and he sniffed. Taylor put her arm around him and hugged him. It's going to be okay, Amari. I promise. She didn't dare tell him that he was going to live with them until she knew for sure. They watched as the woman finally got off her phone and nodded at the Kinos. She smiled. Taylor's heart beat faster when it looked like her mother and father both smiled too and shook the lady's hand. Her father pointed to the apartment and asked the officer a question. He nodded. Outside of the car, Ricky then spoke to Mrs. Garcia. Since you know their household pretty well, could you possibly help my wife gather some things for the children? Oh, yes, of course. Bree and Mrs. Garcia went inside the apartment. Ricky headed to the... All right, we're going to try again. Let me see where I left off. I got a phone call and it messed everything up. Okay. And if you do bad things, then when you die, you don't get to go home to God and be with all the people you love and who love you. So God and Jesus decided to let his son come to the world with a regular mother, a human mother, and God is the Father. She stopped and sighed. She didn't know exactly how to explain it to the children without talking about how babies are made. She smiled. Well, anyway, so Jesus grew inside Mary's tummy, and when he was born, the angels appeared in the sky, and they sang because they were so happy that God's Son came into the world. They named him Jesus, and he would teach the world all about God and about changing your life to live in a good way, and he taught them that love was the most important thing, to love God and to love your family and to love everyone. But he also told them to stop sinning. What's sinning? Amari asked. Well, it's doing bad things like lying or stealing. Jesus wants us to be happy, and he knows that the happiest thing is to be with God, the Father in heaven, and we can't be there with him. But Jesus said if we still stop sinning, and if we will stop sinning and change our attitudes, then he will take the punishment for us, and we can live with God. She frowned. She didn't think she was doing a very good job of explaining, but maybe it was at least a good start. She sighed. So, Christmas is a happy time because it's like a giant birthday party for Jesus, the Son of God. It ain't a happy time for me, Amari said. Taylor leaned her head over and rubbed against his head. I know. And that's sad. There's a lot of sadness in this world, but Jesus wants us each to do everything we can to teach about him and help everyone to be happy. So we're going to help you and Brittany. Is my mommy dead? Brittany asked. No, sweetie, but she's real sick. They took her to the hospital to help her get better. Amari frowned. His mother wasn't sick, he thought. She took too many pills. He knew that. He looked up at Taylor. She ain't sick. She took pills. Taylor nodded. Well, she's sick inside her head, and that makes her think that she needs to take the pills. She has to heal inside her head first, and then she'll stop taking the pills, and then she'll be happy. The kids were silent. Taylor pointed to her phone as the children at the center sang a Christmas song. They listened in silence. Amari broke that silence when he asked, "What's going to happen to us?" Taylor sighed. "I think that's what they're talking about." She pointed to her parents and the police officers and the lady with the notebook. "Do you have any relatives? I mean, like a cousin or a grandma?" "We used to have a grandma, but she died when I was little. I don't know if we got a cousin." "Well, that lady out there will find a place for you to stay." Amari turned his head and looked silently out the window. He tried to stop the tears that formed in his eyes, but when he tried to blink them away, instead they flowed down his cheeks and he sniffed. And Taylor put her arm around him and hugged him. "It's going to be okay, Maury. I promise." She didn't dare tell him that he was going to live with them until she knew for sure. They watched as the woman finally got off her phone and nodded at the Kinos. She smiled. Taylor's heart beat faster when it looked like her mother and father both smiled too and shook the lady's hand. Her father pointed to the apartment and asked the officer a question, and he nodded. Outside the car, Ricky then spoke to Mrs. Garcia. "Since you know their household pretty well, could you possibly help my wife gather some things for the children?" "Oh, yes, of course." Bree and Mrs. Garcia went inside the apartment. Ricky headed to the car and opened the door. "Hey, kiddos, come on out here for a minute. I want to talk to you." The kids were quiet and climbed out of the car. He smiled at them to put them at ease. They looked up at him with such sad eyes. He so wanted to change that. He knelt down so he could be at eye level. "So, Amari and Brittany, you know that your mom had to go to the hospital." "Yes, she's sick in the head," Brittany said. Ricky smiled and glanced at Taylor, who shrugged. "Yes, she has some problems inside her head, and that made her take too many pills, and that made her very ill. But she's going to be okay. But she might have to stay away for a while." He smiled kindly. "So, my wife and I, we were wondering if you would like to come and stay with us while we wait for your mother to get better." Amari blinked. "We can come stay at your house?" "Yes. We promise to take very good care of you. You can be like my little boy. And you, Brittany, you can be like my little girl. And Taylor, she can be like your big sister. And Bree, that's my wife, she can be like your other mother. Just for a while. We'll take very good care of you. What do you say? Will you come stay with us?" "What happens if we don't come stay with you?" Ricky smiled at the boy's hesitation. Life had been a struggle for him, and he wasn't ready to trust anyone. "Well, if you don't want to stay with us, then that lady right there will find another family for you to stay with." He frowned and then looked down at his sister, and she was smiling at him. "I want to stay with Mr. Kino," she said loudly. Taylor smiled. Amari looked back up at Mr. Ricky Kino and nodded. "Yes, sir. We'll stay with you. Do you live far away?" Ricky nodded. "Well, it's about a 20-minute drive, so that's not too bad." Bree and the Garcias, including Caleb, came up to the car carrying several plastic trash bags filled with stuff. Ricky took them from his wife and loaded them into the car, and they thanked the Garcias for their help. Ricky shook Mr. Garcia's hand. "Again, if there's anything I can do for you, please don't hesitate to call. I mean it. Anything." Leonard smiled. "You can call my boss and tell him why I'm late to work today." Ricky nodded. "I'd be happy to do that." He straightaway took out his phone and asked for the number. He took care of the business immediately and had a very friendly chat with Garcia's boss. He hung up and smiled. "You're good to go." They shook hands again. "You are something else, Ricky Kino." Ricky shrugged. "It's no big deal. I'm always happy to help." "I believe you." Ricky looked around. "I can't tell you exactly what's up right now, but let me just say your life around here is about to improve. I promise you." Leonard smiled. "I'll look forward to it." "Well, come to church tomorrow if you can. And one more thing, if you and your sweet wife can come up with a list of people in this apartment community who might need a helping hand to celebrate Christmas, that would be awesome." Leonard's eyes moistened. "We will easily do that. My wife knows every single family in this place. She's like a mother hen to most of the kids." "Well, your wife seems like an angel." "Oh, she is. And apparently so is yours." Ricky smiled. "Aren't we some lucky men?" New scene. It is still December 14th. It's 11:30 a.m. Saturday morning. Hopewood Chapel, Church of Christ, Huntington Beach, California. While Mark, young Eric, and Logan finished off Ronnie's office, most everyone else worked on the vestibule to make it the most fresh and welcoming it could be, and Christmassy, very Christmassy, as ordered by the women. It would help if the stained glass window was in, but that won't happen for at least another week, maybe longer. JoJo and Ronnie were doing a walkthrough of the entire structure, beginning downstairs in the community room. JoJo used his phone to dictate notes and take pictures. Banny, Deuce, Bristol, and Melody worked in the chapel. They dusted and mopped the hardwood floor. They polished benches and planned where the fresh flowers would be placed when they come in. Several times, Deuce maneuvered his way close to Melody and tried to strike up a conversation with her. Melody did her best to respond politely and pretend that he was just a normal, friendly guy. Banny was in a bad mood. When he'd volunteered to help put the office together, he'd been turned down. He was fuming at the moment as he thought about the conversation. Those Adams guys, and Eric Kino too, they all thought they were better than him. He'd had access to the other office with no problem until they showed up. Suddenly, the door was kept locked and no entrance was anyone and no entrance by anyone except Reverend Clark, the Kinos, and Bristol, who was the new office manager. Who the hell did they think they were? And now they've created a second office for Reverend Clark. Banny had needed to know which one would contain the cabinet that held the offering money and if they'd changed the lock to that cabinet. He sat thinking about that conversation that happened a few minutes ago. "Why don't I help you move the stuff from the old office and get things organized?" he'd asked. "Thanks, Banny, but we got this," young Eric said. "Well, you know, Reverend Clark trusted me, and I know the ins and outs of how things are supposed to be," Banny replied. Mark Adams had turned and smiled from where he was working on something under the desk. "Well, things are going to be run a little differently than they used to be." Banny frowned. "Well, there's a trick to opening the money cabinet. The key is worn down and has to be turned just right. I can show you." "I really appreciate your willingness to help, Banny," Mark Adams said, "but the money will no longer be kept in a cabinet. All the rules of how things are done are changing." "Does Reverend Clark know that you're changing the way he does things? Because he's kind of set in his ways." "Well, Reverend Clark has given us free rein to set things up for him in the most secure and efficient way. Think of it as the church now has a new owner. But hey, the girls could use some help in the chapel." It had taken Banny everything he had to not punch the guy in the mouth. He'd pretty much said that Banny himself is not allowed in the office anymore, yet he and his kids have free access. It looked like he wasn't going to be able to skim money from the church anymore. It'd been so easy, like taking candy from a baby. The only silver lining was he still had all the old folks eating out of his hands, and soon he'd have access to Mrs. Palmer's safe. And then he'd start working on offing her and marrying Bristol. He looked up at Bristol as she worked polishing the new baby grand piano. She was obviously Filipino, like himself. In his opinion, her one and only beauty feature was her hair. It was thick and straight and dark and long, almost to her waist. His eyes shifted over to her friend Melody. Now, Melody was hot. She was slim and feminine with a tiny nose, a beautiful smile, luscious lips, and her eyes weren't brown. They were like green or something. They seemed to change color. They seemed to change colors. She got to him. He'd scared her the other day. He knew that, and he found that he liked her trembling and looking all scared. He liked that a lot. But he needed to keep that temp down for now. Maybe after things calmed down around here, he'd catch little Miss Melody alone. He sighed and headed to speak to Bristol. He wanted to spend some time alone with her and work on seducing her so he could guarantee her agreeing to marry him. He pasted a smile on his face and approached her. "Hey, babe," he said sweetly as he ran a finger down her arm. She turned and smiled. "Hi, Banny. Looks like we're almost finished." He nodded. "What do you say you and me go grab some lunch and spend the afternoon together? We haven't had a chance to be alone for days now." Bristol tried to keep the smile on her face. She couldn't help that her hands began to shake. I need to use the bathroom." She turned and ran out of the chapel. Melody watched her go and looked back at Banny. He came toward her immediately. She frowned at him. "Don't talk to me," she said, and turned to leave, but he grabbed her wrist and jerked her around. "You told her, didn't you?" Melody narrowed her eyes in anger. "Yes, I told her, but she doesn't believe me. She's totally in love with you and doesn't think you can do anything wrong." Banny smiled. "Good. But something's wrong. She's been acting strange, and she just ran out of here like the place was on fire." Melody tried to jerk her hand free. When he wouldn't let her go, she had to think fast. I'll go check on her. She's probably just embarrassed to tell you that it's that time of month." Logan came into the chapel. "Hey," was all he said. Banny let Melody go. Melody ran toward Logan. "I'm going to go check on Bristol. She's not feeling well." Logan nodded and watched her go. He moved toward Banny, his jaw set. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, buddy. I'm only going to tell you this one time. Don't touch my girl. Don't lay one finger on her." "I don't know what you're talking about. You trying to pick a fight with me?" "No, I'm not trying to fight, but I will. I come in here and I see you holding onto her arm, and I see her try to pull away. Are you jealous or something?" "Hardly. Look, Bristol is Melody's friend, and you're Bristol's friend, and I'd like us all to get along. But I don't tolerate anyone putting their hands on my girl. That's just the way it is. You got it?" "Yeah, I got it, buddy," he emphasized. His eyes narrowed. "But just so you know, I'm not afraid of you." Logan smiled and nodded. "Yeah, and I'm not afraid of you either." Logan turned and went to check on the girls. Deuce watched him go and went down the aisle to talk to Banny. "That guy is not just the canary you said he is, Ban." Banny shrugged. "What? He sings and plays piano. He's nothing." "You're underestimating him, man. He's a member of the Kino family, right? You think he doesn't know how to fight?" "He won't be able to fight with a knife in his back, now will he? Are you planning on taking him out?" "No, it's just a fantasy." Deuce shook his head. "You need to steer clear of these Kino people." "I'm not afraid of them. It would be really fun to take them down a peg or two." "You're talking suicide, man. My advice is to follow the advice you gave to me. Stick to your original plan. You'll walk away with a cool million. Don't get greedy and don't get cocky." New scene. It is still December 14th. It's 12:30 p.m. Saturday afternoon, South Kino Estate, Crystal Cove, California. Amari's and Brittany's eyes opened wide as the gate swung open and Mrs. Kino drove through the gate. "Mom," Taylor said, "drive slow." Bree nodded. "So," Taylor began, "this is where we live, and this is where you're going to live for a little while." She pointed across the expanse of green. "This is the front yard, so there's plenty of room to play ball or run races and play chase and stuff like that." "What's chase?" Brittany asked. Taylor sighed. "It's a game where you try to catch each other. You'll see. It's fun. And see the big circle driveway? There's plenty of room on it to do giant chalk drawings or roller skate or use the scooter." She smiled as her eyes lit up. "And that's the house." Amari's eyes were like saucers. "It's really big," he mumbled. She nodded. "It's big, but you'll get used to it." The car came to a halt, and Bree turned and smiled at the children. "Well, it might seem like a big house, but it's a home where you are completely welcome and loved, and we want you to feel at home. Okay?" Brittany smiled, and Amari nodded. "Brittany, can you undo your seatbelt?" She nodded and fumbled with the buttons, but finally got it. They got out of the car as Ricky drove up. He got out and approached the children with a smile. "Hey, guys." "Hi," Brittany said. Amari nodded. Ricky knelt down in front of them. "Okay. Before we go in, let's talk a minute, because I want to do that so you know you can always talk to us and tell us how you feel. I know," he stopped and gestured to Bree and Taylor. "We know that this is a hard time for you, too. Your mother's in the hospital trying to get well, and here you are being taken care of by people you barely know in a big old house that looks giant, but it's going to be okay. I promise." "How many people live here?" Brittany asked. "Well, it's me and Bree and Taylor and our son Eric. And lots of times we have company, like Taylor's boyfriend Gabe spends the night sometimes, and Eric's girlfriend Jordan spends the night sometimes, and Jordan has a little brother about your age, and he spends the night sometimes. So it won't be lonely. There will be lots of people to play with or just talk to." "Are we going to go to school?" Amari asked. Ricky nodded. "Yes. You're going to keep going to your same school unless you want to go to a new school." Amari shook his head. I want to go to my same school. Ricky and Bree both nodded. Then that's what you'll do. We'll drive you to school and pick you up each day, Ricky said. So are you ready to go inside? Bree asked. They both nodded. Okay, let's go, Taylor said excitedly. They went inside, and the children were fairly quiet as they took them on a tour of the home. Deciding to not overwhelm them, they didn't go downstairs yet. Upstairs in the hall, Bree opened the door just across the hall from the room where Gabe usually stayed. They went inside and walked slowly around the room. So let me ask you a question, Bree said as she sat down on the queen-size bed. She patted the bed. Come sit up here. Amari sat down, and Ricky lifted Brittany up onto the bed and sat her next to her brother. Bree smiled at them. I saw at your house that you two usually sleep together in the same room and in the same bed. Brittany nodded her head. Amari didn't say anything. So, do you want to do that here too? Do you want to share this room and this bed, or do you want to have your own rooms? Amari blinked. Ricky could easily read his facial expressions. It had never dawned on him to be able to have his own room. He wanted his own room, but he was torn between that and Brittany being alone. Have you ever had your own room before? Ricky asked. Both children shook their heads. Have you ever dreamed about or thought about having your own room? He asked. Amari slowly nodded his head. Brittany smiled. I thought about having a princess bed. Amari smiled at that and rolled his eyes. Tell you what, Bree began. You two share a room for a few days, and we'll go on the computer and look at what kind of room you want, and you can decide later if you want to have your own room and what you want it to look like. They both nodded. For now, Ricky said, you can sleep in this room, and the bathroom is right in there, he said as he walked to a door and opened it and left it open. So Miss Bree and Mrs. Garcia went into your apartment and gathered as many of your things as they could and put them in bags, he explained.